Hello, welcome to yet another lecture. We're going back to a different series now. We're going on to the proofs for the existence of God and the divinity of the Torah. And we've got a different approach now. The last two lectures we gave on this were proving historically the divine revelation at Sinai, and we had 12 approaches there to show that it really happened and the transmission to us is reliable. We had 12 different independent approaches there, so that was very convincing in itself. And of course, in terms of Jews themselves, this is the most important one because it tells us the personal connection we have with God as well, as opposed to some of the more philosophical, more abstract proofs, which don't tell you about the nature of God so much, they just tell you that God exists. So we're going to do another proof, which is kind of along the lines of the first one. We're going to speak about proving God's existence and the divinity of the Torah as follows. So let's start with a simple idea, right? One that doesn't require like a leap of faith or anything, because remember, we're trying to be very rational. This channel, we're trying to do everything rational, rigorous thought processes. We don't want to miss anything out, or just like, sort of like skip over the cracks of any arguments. We want to make steel man everything here. Okay, so we know, we've spoken about this before, about the world follows patterns, right? That's what science is based on, right? So nature follows patterns. If you drop something, it falls all the time, right? You mix certain chemicals, they react, and you can predict what the reaction is going to be. So science is based on predictability, and so is history. Yeah, everything in the laws of economics, we said, the laws of psychology, right? There's certain patterns in the psychology of human beings. Everything which we can examine, yeah, has patterns to them, right? So we can say that's empirical, or at least you can see patterns and try giving rational explanations to the different patterns we see. That's what science tries to do. It suggests models which can explain to a certain extent the different phenomenon which we observe, right? But even if we don't come up with a formula or a law of nature to describe something, but we can say that this happens, right? So because if a person doesn't know, if you take testing my science now, if you take oh dear, okay, I better not show how much I forgot to my science now. You take two chemicals, you put them together. I think one's copper sulfate or something, copper oxide with sulfuric acid. You put them together, I think you end up with a blue solution, right, which is copper sulfate with water, something like that. You can test, write in the comments if I got that one right, for any scientists out there. So you put them together. So let's say a person knows that this is this chemical, that's that chemical. You put them together, it always turns blue. Don't have a clue what's going on, what the final chemical is or anything. And you don't even have a theory behind it, but you just know when you put these two things together, this thing, put your hand in, out burns, that's sulfuric acid. You mix it in with something else, and then you put your hand in, copper sulfate, it's harmless, as far as I know. Right? So that's the nature of science. Empirical science is basically just describing what happens, right? And you're saying there's a pattern here. Ideally you want to put a model to it, right? And explain the mechanics of what's going on, but really, for something to reach the standards of being scientific theory, you have to be able to predict and based on patterns. Now, history also works like that. So human behavior, right? So there's anthropology, right? There's a study of human behavior, I think, right? They've also got their rules and things like that. So human behavior, although it's messy, it still shows patterns, right? It's not as clear as, you can't put the chemical in here like that, because you have to observe history, you have to see how nations do things, and things move much slower when we're talking about nations and interactions between people and things like that. It's not so clear cut as a science, but if you've got an overview of history, then you can come up with certain rules. And that was the basis of our very first proof for the divinity of the Torah, right? The idea that national traditions, which were a national experience, are always true. That's an empirical fact, right? Unless you have one day someone comes up with a refutation to that, but that's the pattern which always happens, right? And therefore you can rely on the divinity of the Torah. That was proof number 1 out of 12 there, if you want to go back, right? So human behavior, although, yeah, you see the empires, they rise and fall, right? Societies clash over power, land, ideology. There's certain driving forces behind the way that nations, people, and on the broader level, how nations as a collectives interact with each other. Even persecution, which is the darkest side of human behavior, also tends to follow identifiable causes. Right? That's not theology. It's not like just my ideas. That is an observation, right? You see, that's what happens. There's certain patterns to the way nations interact. So now we've got a question. What do we do when a case doesn't follow the rules? Let's say you've got a case, a nation, which doesn't follow the rules of any nation, not even close. It's not just divergent, it's uniquely different. It's its own category, you'd say, even, right? It completely breaks the mold. Yeah? What if a group's treatment across history breaks every pattern, every cause and effect model? Okay, remember, that's not even going into the why. We'll speak about the why later, why certain events happen, why certain interactions between nations happen, right? We can have theories about that, but let's focus on the actual patterns, right? Right, so we're going to go into this in more detail. Now, more than that, what if this anomaly, which is just ridiculous, it just stands out like a sore thumb, yeah? On top of that, it wasn't just unexpected, but let's say it was predicted thousands of years before it happened. That would be even more incredible, right? Something which just blows all the laws of natural history or history of human civilization. It completely defies all the rules. And not only that, there was a prediction for that beforehand. Okay? That's impressive. At least we're going to see how impressive it is at the end when we make our conclusion. But let's have a look at, let's discuss this idea of the nature of how nations interact and how human beings function in terms of collectives. Okay? Right. We'll focus more on, since this is a topic here, about persecution and oppression. Okay? So when certain peoples are persecuted, it's usually for reasons we can explain. Yeah, evil reasons, usually. Rational, yeah. Sometimes they can be evil. I would say most of the time they're evil. Most of the time. If not all the time. Okay, I have to think through examples. But rational, definitely. There's definitely reasons behind why people do things. Based on bad attitudes or anything. Even some are much worse than others. You've got malicious and malevolent reasons. You've got ones which are just due to self-defense or fear, which can be twisted into bad reasons. We can have some which are genuinely righteous, possibly. But we can always see patterns. This is what the point of this lecture is going to be focusing on, the first part anyway. There's always patterns. For example, let's think territorial conflict, right? Two countries arguing over a piece of land, or one country wants to expand. For example, it's Rome against Carthage, right? There's the Punic Wars, I think they're called. Right? It lasted over 100 years, hundreds of years possibly. I don't know the exact dates, right? Over control of the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, that area. Ultimately, Rome actually destroyed Carthage, right? In about the time of the Greek exile, I think about 150 BCE or something like that, right? And they destroyed, they razed the city to the ground. They wanted to conquer it, and we're going to leave no remnant, no hope for them to come back. We've conquered it now. Or let's take a more modern example, Russia against Ukraine, right? Different discussions what was the real reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, right? Russia's invasion was largely driven by geopolitical ambitions to reassert control over a former Soviet territory. That's how some people see it as. Some people see it as self-defense against a preemptive strike because of the expansion of NATO. People who are pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, they've got both their theories on either side of the argument there, right? But it's really over territory ultimately, right? Now, there is an exception to this rule, right? With the Roman Empire, we're going to see this is already giving you a taste of what we're going to encounter in this lecture. When Rome attacked, generally when it did its conquests, it left those cities and countries intact, with the exception of Carthage. There's one other example. Like with Carthage, they were very angry, whatever. They just wanted to flatten it because Carthage could almost beat the Romans. I think at one point, was it Hannibal? Was it Hannibal? Was Carthage? I'm getting confused. Maybe I think that was Carthage. Yeah, they almost conquered Rome or something like that. They were one of the biggest enemies of the Romans. They were a threat to Rome, so maybe they decided to completely annihilate them. But usually the Romans left the cities or the countries they kept intact in order to tax them and to gain benefits from them. What's the point of destroying something and then what's the point of conquering a massive, vast empire, like a Persian empire or whatever it happens to be, and you don't take advantage of the reason why you wanted it in the first place, right? You don't want to destroy just for the sake of destruction. That doesn't make sense, right? So what the second exception to the rule, which is much more stark, was when Rome conquered Jerusalem, right? In the year of the destruction of the Second Temple, the beginning of the Roman exile, which we're still in now, for hopefully not for so much longer. In the year 70 CE, right? Over 1 million Jews were killed. They're just massacred, right? Right? The site of the temple was razed to the ground, right? There was discussion whether Titus actually wanted he's the one who conquered Jerusalem. Titus's arch in Rome, famous arches, named after him it's got images of different vessels of the Holy Temple there, which they took out of the temple. So Titus, what apparently, according to that, Josephus, I think Josephus, a historian at that time, a very famous historian for the Romans, he wanted to leave the temple standing, right? Right, because he said, look, I conquered the great city of Jerusalem, the very world-famous city, and a huge temple. Yeah, but they destroyed it. They still destroyed it, and then later on they razed over the ruins, so it's completely irrecognizable, and that's one of the reasons, one of the tragedies which happened on Tisha B'Av. We spoke about Tisha B'Av a year ago, I think. Okay, so you've got this idea. So that's an exception to the rule already off the bat, right? Right? What you say? Carthage also got destroyed. Okay, so it's not such a big exception. But at this point, I'm just trying to show you different types of reasons behind conflicts. You've got religious wars. The Crusades, for example, when the Christians made a campaign against the Muslim lands, right? And they wanted to take them over and to bring Christianity to those countries, right? And on the way, you can understand the oppression which happened there. Yeah, they killed Muslims and Jewish communities along the way, right? That makes sense. That's a reason for oppression, based on not territorial expansion, but religious supremacy. We don't like your religion, we're going to kill you. Okay, fine. And we're going to see, so you're going to see later on why we're going to say that this can't be the reason why people persecute Jews, though, because sometimes those reasons don't make sense. For example, you've got other cases of religious wars. I'm just showing that these patterns repeat themselves. They've got Sunni versus Shia Islam, which we had in our previous lecture, on the Armageddon lectures, right? Right, the conflict after Muhammad's death, and they had lots of internal fighting between these two factions, right? Deadly wars, proper wars where they killed them, not just debates or anything like that. They killed them. They killed each other. Even nowadays, that's what they're doing. Right, as we said, Iran was threatening to do something with Saudi Arabia. Okay, we're not sure, invade or just bomb or whatever it was. And of course, you got, for example, like you've got Islamists or Islamic terrorists. Why do they do what they do? Yeah, we want to cause terror because we want our religion to be sort of like the flip side of the Crusades, right? The Crusades were in the 11th, 12th, 13th century, right? 14th century even, right? That's when they mainly happened. And then you have like for example, let's take one off the top of my head, like in Nigeria. Nigeria is a Christian country, but yeah, we've got extremist Muslim groups which are causing terrorism there. Boko Haram is the name of it, and they target Christians and in such a brutal way, yeah, murdering, kidnapping, horrible. So see, people do things for religious reasons, or sometimes it can be through ethnic reasons. That means you're a different race than us, right? So to preserve national purity, for example, like the Armenian genocide in the early 1900s, right? So the Ottoman Turks, they feared the Christian Armenians would side with Russia in World War One, right? So what they do, right? They attack the Armenians, and over 1 million people were slaughtered. Unbelievable, right? And that was over 100 years ago, where the world population wasn't so great as it is today. Then you've got more recently, you've got the Rwandan genocide in 1994, yeah, where the Hutus and the Tutsis, right? The Hutus murdered also about 1 million Tutsis, right? And moderate Hutus as well, in just 100 days, right? 3 months, 1 million people. That's crazy. That is like 10,000 people a day, yeah? And they blamed them, they say blame them for past domination under colonial powers, right? Right? That was all over the Hutu tribes and the Tutsi tribes, right? Some other Hutus who wanted to make peace, they just got run over in the middle. Okay? Right, so what we have so far, people fight and kill over territories, over religion, over race and ethnicity, right? Another reason, you have more abstract reasons, like economic scapegoating, when a minority is seen as disproportionately wealthy or economically threatening, right? Then sometimes the poorer side of the two sides, they retaliate, right? For example, the Chinese in Indonesia, right? So what happened in the 1950s? There's some ethnic Chinese people who were living in Indonesia were targeted for they were accused of controlling the commerce. Maybe they were, right? That led to rioting and killings, right? Or in Uganda in 1972, Idi Amin, the president there, he expelled 60,000 Asians, right? Indians. Why? Because he accused them of economic sabotage, right? despite the fact that they had a vital role in Uganda's economy. They're the ones running it. They're the ones who made the economy successful in the first place. But yet, he got rid of them. Right? And you know what happened with Uganda? Absolute disaster afterwards. Right? Okay. Another reason. Two more reasons. Yeah. Right. Blaming people during crises. So this is basically scapegoating. Right. So for example, like in the Black Death in Europe, in the 1300s, right, Jews across Europe were accused of poisoning wells because what happened? For some reason, Jews weren't dying from the Black Death as much as non-Jews, and they're wondering why. Jewish people are very hygienic. We've got rituals, we've got laws to do with hygiene. Before we eat, wash our hands. After you go to the toilet, you've got to wash your hands. That we wash at least once a week for the Sabbath, if not more. In those times, people had a bath maybe 2-3 times a year, 4 times a year, maybe. Right? I think maybe that's just the royalty. Maybe it might have had it 4 times a year. I can't remember. Read it in the horrible history books once. If anyone knows who what those books are, very interesting. So they see these Jews not dying from the Black Death, and think, oh, it's not a disease. You know what's happening? We're actually being poisoned, right? It's the Jews who are poisoning us, right? So what they do, entire communities, unfortunately, were burned alive in cities like in Strasbourg and Mainz, right? It's a terrible, terrible time. Those massacres which happened there. Okay. Or the COVID pandemic. Take it to something a bit more recent, right? In parts of the world, East Asians, right, so Chinese-looking people, were blamed and violently attacked based on conspiracy theories. So, oh, the Chinese are trying to kill us all. They're trying to, whatever it is. Okay. So scapegoating. The final one is distraction. So when you've got someone who's a dictator, or even not a dictator, we've seen recently, like in England with the current Prime Minister, or Joe Biden in America, when they're trying to cover up for shortcomings in their administrations, they blame the far right. It's just the far right. They blame the far right. I don't see many Nazis walking around. That's not the problem. The problem is that they've gone so far to the left that anyone who is moderately on the right is seen as far right, and they're the ones who are criticizing them. All right, and that's what happened. That's what got Trump elected, essentially. Yeah, the economy got so bad, and then people started to see through this scapegoating. Why do you keep blaming everything on the other one? You're the ones in charge now. How can you blame Trump for all the problems happening now? So they saw through them, yeah. But, okay, so you can say in England and America, not so bad, right? However, this is one of the worst forms of killing, oppression, which we see in history. When dictators redirect public anger towards a minority to protect their own power, rather, right? So, for example, Stalin, he purged the Jews, right? Soviet Jews were labeled as rootless cosmopolitans and targeted as enemies of the state, right? Or in Mao's Cultural Revolution, in China, whole revolution, the country, it's a communist revolution. Educated elites were publicly humiliated, tortured, and killed for being subversive, right? So, you basically all these intellectuals, you're trying to undermine our new ideology, right? But really, things were pretty bad in Maoist China, right? You had the Great Famine. Many times in Mao's China, there was millions, tens of millions of people died under him based on certain policies, right? And so basically, they used to scapegoat people, right? The intellectuals, because they're messing everything up. But our plan would have worked if it wasn't for those whoever. Okay. Right. So see, in every one of these cases, persecution follows a logic twisted logic perhaps, but it's you can understand why they do it, right? Okay. It can be explained in political, economic, cultural terms. We've always got an explanation. You can see patterns there, right? Even in the case of the Jews, that's true. In the examples we gave about Jews. Okay. So, what was if I was to tell you that there's a group which don't follow any of those patterns, right? No land to fight over, no missionary campaigns, no rebellion, very obedient, no control over armies or governments, right? Yeah. So you're talking about usually the only times the Tutsis have been persecuted are when they came in conflict with the Hutus. Fine, okay. Chinese, maybe in Indonesia for economic reasons. Okay. Or by the Japanese, when the Japanese wanted conquest. Okay. But those were few and far between, all these examples. But what happens if there's a nation which has been persecuted in nearly every single century? We're going to see almost every single year for the last 2,500, 3,500 years, maybe 3,000 years, let's say, right? Once they came to the land of Israel, the Jews, basically, they're persecuted in every century, without exception, right? By kings, peasants, fascists and communists, Christians and Muslims and pagans, and now even secular progressives, atheists. What is going on? Okay, so just for those who don't know about Jewish history, let's just give you a taste of what we're talking about, how ridiculous it is. So how do we do this? Let's pick up some major examples to start off with, and then I'm going to show you something which is just going to give you probably shock you. Okay, so let's start in this millennium, basically. Well, not this millennium, the one I was born in, right? In the thousands, right? 1190 in York, here in England, not far from where I live. The Crusaders in England attacked the Jewish community, blamed them for killing Jesus. Hundreds were murdered or committed mass suicide in order to avoid slaughter, right? Right, or forced conversion in some cases, right? In 1290 in England again, Edward I expelled all the Jews from England, an expulsion, not for crimes, but because they weren't politically useful anymore, right? And the Christian nobles resented their role in money lending because Christians were forbidden to lend money for interest, so therefore you can't make a business lending money, you're just essentially losing money. So they needed Jews to be the money lenders, right? Because no one else would be money lenders. And in some places, they actually banned Jews from doing any jobs, any significant jobs, except money lending, just to force them into it. And then, because of that, they accused the Jews of being money hungry. Because look, they lend us money, they just take more back. You're the ones who forced the Jews to do it in the first place. So that's how that happens, right? Another very famous example of 1492 in Spain, right? After 1,000 years of peaceful residence in Spain, the Jews had a golden age in Spain, right? They were expelled under the Alhambra decree, and tens of thousands of Jews fled, right? Exiled basically from Spain, and others were forcibly baptized or tortured under the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah, they literally converted people with the most horrendous tortures imaginable. Well, we've seen once you say that, someone comes up with a new type of unimaginable torture. So I'm not going to mention them here, but maybe I should, just to make people realize how bad it's hard. I'll give you one example of sort of things they did in the Spanish Inquisition. they used to torture the parents in front of the children. What they did, they cut out the bottoms of the feet. I'm not going to be too graphic. It's graphic enough as it is without going into it in my normal thorough way. They put butter there, right? And they put them on a spit. Butter melted in there. You can imagine. And they killed parents in front of children, children in front of parents. If you don't convert, this is what we're going to do. And thousands of Jews gave up their life. Al Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, the loyalty the Jewish people have. That's the stiff neck. People say that Jewish people are stubborn. That's a bad thing. It's a very good thing. It's one of the reasons God chose the Jewish people, because they knew once they commit to something, they're going to see it through to the end. Yeah, horrible. And then you have one of the worst tragedies ever for the Jewish people was in 1648, 1649, the Khmelnytsky massacres. Right, so the Khmelnytsky was in Ukraine. He was in charge of the Cossacks there, and they had the uprising, and this is absolutely. People think the Holocaust was bad. They don't know history. In terms of percentages, I think about half of the Jews in Europe perished. I think, according to some numbers, right? Hundreds of thousands died. Right, I think about 300 communities, Jewish communities, were just like massacred by these Cossack forces, right? Why? Because they were blamed as middlemen between the Polish landlords and the Ukrainian peasants, right? The Polish said that, oh, you Jews are on the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainians said, oh, you're with the Polish, right? They just killed the Jews. Each side killed the Jews for accusing the other one, for them being the other side. Again, I think I have to say these things, otherwise people won't realize the uniqueness of the brutality of the things that should be done against the Jews. They didn't just go around mindlessly killing. They did calculated, torturous, evil things. I really don't want to say. I think I have to. Sorry. This happened a few hundred years ago. It's so devastating. Still, just thinking about the evil. They took pregnant women, and they cut out the fetuses from the body, and they put a live cat back in place, and they sewed the women back up again. Okay, I'm not going to go on. That should be it. That should be enough for anyone with any sensitivity to realize this total evil. This is just not normal. It's just a hatred which is just beyond, right? It's pathological. It's more than that. Sorry about that. Keep myself composed here. The Russian Empire in the late 1800s, the Tsar Alexander II was killed, and he was assassinated, and the Jews were falsely blamed. And what happened? Pogroms. So people went through the Jewish villages, they torched the synagogues, families murdered again. Okay. Notice, like, all different countries. We had two in England, one in Spain, Ukraine and Poland, Russia, and then of course you have the big one which everyone knows about. It's the Nazis in the 1930s and 1940s. 6 million Jews, yeah, again half of the European Jewry, were systematically exterminated, right? Not for religious reasons, but for their DNA, right? Because a huge percentage, I don't want to say it's the majority, were assimilated Jews. The Jews just weren't religious. I mean, obviously there was many religious Jews as well, but there's a huge assimilation movement. They want to be part of the Germany, and one of the most highly cultured civilizations in the world at that time was Germany. People don't know that. It was a very sophisticated country, right? And Hitler, right, went after anyone who had a parent who was a Jew, a grandparent, or even a great grandparent, because some Jews were very assimilated, and they were basically had like non-Jewish parents, non-Jewish grandparents, but one of those non-Jewish grandparents had one Jewish parent. That was enough. The DNA, that's have to assimilate them. The Aryan race has to be pure. We can't have any traces of the Jewish blood in Germany, right? So it doesn't matter. Jews who had assimilated, converted, rejected Judaism, they were murdered just the same, right? Again, doesn't follow patterns, right? If the reason people hate Jews is this, then why in a different country they were hated for a different reason, and in another country they're hated for a different reason, right? In the 21st century now, Jews are demonized by Islamists as global conspirators, right? They say, oh, you control all the banks, don't you? Right? Far left academics, yeah, they say the whole thing about cultural Marxism, about the oppressors and the oppressed, right? We always take the side of the ones who are being oppressed. So let's make the Jews into the oppressors somehow, right? So even though they've been attacked by Arab countries for the last 100 years, and they're just trying to defend themselves in a tiny piece of land, and they have to put a fence up to stop people coming in and kidnapping people and doing suicide bombs. So, oh no, so now you're oppressing the poor Gazans. They're just defending themselves. They don't want to get killed, right? If anything, the Jews are the oppressed ones. But yet, everything flips on its head. And these people who always try sticking up for the oppressed, somehow, suddenly now the Jews are the ones doing the oppressing. Despite the fact they're a tiny nation amongst a billion Arabs, maybe more, who are basically just trying to kill them, or their enemies are wiping them out. Right? It just doesn't make sense. If it was totally logical, then they'd look objectively who's being oppressed here. But yeah, oh, the Jews. No. We can't let them be the oppressed. We need to make them the oppressors in order that we can legitimize our hatred for them. Right? What other group has been expelled for over 100 times across continents, eras, empires, ideologies? Over 100 times they've been kicked out of different countries. That's incredible. That doesn't follow any patterns at all. There's never been a nation like that. You can say, oh, the Jewish people expelled. Okay, so why didn't they all settle in one country? Okay, they're expelled from here. Oh, so they can all settle in one country where they're accepted, right? Or just don't get persecuted in this country. Look at the Gypsies, for example. They're just a nomadic people. They travel from different countries within Europe. Yeah, they don't get persecuted. They don't get killed and massacred, right? Okay. Right. So that's just showing you a picture of the ubiquitous nature of anti-Semitism. It's not just a small time period with one nation oppressing them, like almost all cases which we have in history. Right? This is something which goes on and on, and they're not troublemakers. Jews are not troublemakers. Yeah, they're very, very helpful to the countries which let them live in them. They're very loyal, very patriotic, right? Of course, keeping their own Jewish traditions, but they try to support the country which they're in as well. We have gratitude, right? So it just doesn't make sense on so many levels, right? Just the fact that it's so widespread and goes throughout time. It's like one of those films or movies where where a person, basically everything's going against him. Whatever he does, there's something goes wrong, right? What's going on here? So we know that obviously the writer of the story is trying to make an interesting story, that this person's just got super bad luck. Yeah, everything which he does, the worst thing happens, just to mess everything up in his life, right? That makes an interesting story. That's not how the world works. Yeah, the world works with patterns, as we said. Okay, now I'd just like to show you one more thing before we move on to the next part. So this is a Wikipedia article about anti-Semitism, the timeline of anti-Semitism. So you can read through it yourself. I'll try to put the link in the description if you want to look at it yourself. Just look at timeline of anti-Semitism in Wikipedia. You should find it. Okay, so it's got subcategories. Antiquity. Which century do you want? Pick a century, any century. All right, let's pick the third one. All right, the Jewish community in Horeb is destroyed. Remember, history wasn't that detailed in that time, right? But we do have records of just the Jewish city of Nahardol, which was in Babylon, a very, very famous city for people who study the Talmud. Many of the great Talmudists were teachers in Nahardol, and it got destroyed, right? And of course, the first and second century, you can imagine there's much more history about it. Tiberius expels the Jews from Rome, right? 38, pogrom, right? The year 50, Jews ordered not to hold meetings, right? Claudius expels Jews from Rome again, right? Roman soldiers kill 50,000 Jews in the Alexandria riot. The first Jewish-Roman war, with the destruction of the temple. Vespasian and I think his son Titus, right, besieged Jerusalem, right. And look at this. Titus refuses to accept a wreath of victory because there's no merit in vanquishing people forsaken by their God. Just to rub the salt in the wound. So this is real Esau against Yaakov, Esau against Jacob. The Jewish people come from Jacob and his twin brother Esau. That's the Jews and the Romans, right? The events of this period were recorded in detail by Josephus, we mentioned him earlier. His record is largely sympathetic to the Roman point of view, and it was written in Rome, under Roman protection. He was actually Jewish himself, and I think he was an estranged Jew. He wasn't religious, right? So he kind of assimilated into Roman society, right? So it's a controversial source, but he describes the Jewish revolt as being led by tyrants, right? And Titus having moderation in his escalation of the siege of Jerusalem. Our records say something very, very different, right? And finally, the year of the destruction, over 1 million Jews perish, 97,000 taken as slaves. I think that's also based on Josephus. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. We tried to read the book, The Ninth of Av by Aryeh Kaplan. He brings a lot of Josephus in just to tell you the actual history. So it's not just based on the Talmud. This is actually, we've got a corroborating source for this. Pogrom against the Jews in Damascus. Okay, that's in Syria, north of Israel, right? Okay, let's have a look. What else? Fabrications. It's a blood libel, the first recorded blood libel. That means they accused Jews of killing someone in order to take their blood. Now it's interesting, the Jews are not allowed to drink blood. It's one of the most serious prohibitions. Well, from an animal, from a human as well, it's prohibited. Not as bad as an animal's blood, but yeah, they're both prohibited in Jewish law. But yet they accuse us of something which we never do, right? Okay. And you've got anti-Semitic myths in his works, right? Right, Titus Flavius Clemens, nephew of Vespasian, right, and supposed convert to Judaism, is put to death on charges of atheism, right? That could be referring to Onkelos, one of our great commentaries, actually. Commentary that's the main commentary we actually read on the Torah itself. It's on the side of the commentaries there. Right. And then he wrote, Tacitus wrote an anti-Jewish polemic in his histories, right? Bringing up all different types of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Hadrian bans circumcision, right? They're trying to not just kill the Jews, they're trying to kill the religion, right? Hadrian renames Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina and builds a Roman monument over the site of the Temple Mount. Jews are banned from visiting. Judea is renamed to Syria Palestina. That's where the name Palestine comes from originally. The Greeks renamed it in order to suppress the Jewish people's attachment to the land, to basically rub salt in the wound, referring to the Greek words for both the Levant, which is Syria, as well as the region at the time, right? Palestine is something connected with the Greeks or something like that. Right. Earliest known accusation of Jewish deicide. That means the idea that we killed Jesus, right? Right, made in a sermon on the Passover. Right, so you see how things are going here. Not good, right? And again, let's have a look. Let's just look at the Rabbi Bar Nachmani, famous story in the Talmud. He had to flee into the forest from one of the Roman, I think it was Roman officers. He died. Intermarriage between Christians and Jews is banned in the Roman Empire, declared punishable by death, which for us is good because Jews are not allowed to marry non-Jews without, unless the non-Jew converts first, right? Book burning of texts in Persia, right? Citation needed. Okay, fine, right? So look at it. But now let's just go through. It's going to get a bit crazy now. 408, 415, 418, 490, 425. Look at this. 500. Right? Right? Laws against Jews testifying. Right? Right? Jews can't have public groups. Jews can't have public office. You getting the idea? Massacres of Jews all across the Byzantine Empire, the early 600s, right? This is the first instance where prohibition of Judaism affected an entire country. Yeah, that after many of his, what's going on with the mouse here? After many of his anti-Jewish edicts were ignored, King Sigismund, don't know who that is. Spain, right? Prohibits Judaism in Spain and Septimania. Okay, those not baptized fled. Okay, so the whole country targets Jews here. Okay, okay. Right, again, more. Look at this. This is almost every 2 or 3 years happening. Every 10 years. Oh, the 8th century doesn't seem so bad, actually. Bans worship on Temple Mount. This is after after Islam was made in the 600s. Then you've got a few bit of targeting from the Muslims now. Okay, the 800s, 900s, the 1000s. Look at this. 1008, 1009, 1010, 1011, 11, 12, 13, 16. You can go through this yourself in your own time. Look at this. Incredible. Yeah, we talk about from the Arabs here, from Saladin conquers Jerusalem, bans Jews to live in Jerusalem, and that's the same year as 500 Jews of York were massacred, right? That's the one we mentioned before, right? 13th century, the Jewish quarters. What's going on here? uh, the Jewish quarter in Constantinople burned down by Crusaders during the siege of Constantinople. Again, just burn down the Jewish quarter. Yeah. Jews have to wear different. Something's going on here. Right. Jewish homes burned and looted. Jewish population of Halle, where's this? In Germany, expelled. Right. Another blood libel, 1235, 1236, attacks Jews, 1236, anti-Semitic spontaneous attacks, 1240, expulsion from Brittany, right? It's a place in France, is it? Yeah. And the very famous 1240, terrible things happened around this time. Maybe we'll touch on this in the Lashon Hara lecture, which we'll hopefully have one day. This is a very significant time. This is one of the times where Mashiach could have come, and when it doesn't come, bad things happen. Things go the other way. The famous disputation of Paris, he puts the Talmud on trial, the Jewish oral law, and he charges it with blasphemy, right? And they burn. I think that's when they burned the Talmud, right? A pogrom in Frankfurt. Yeah, 2 years later, the Talmud is convicted of corrupting the Jews. 24 cartloads of handwritten Talmudic manuscripts, some 10,000 volumes, comprising most of the extant volumes in France, are burned in the streets of Paris. That means the vast majority of Jewish books were burned. And we're talking about the Talmud. We're not talking about a Bible, which is relatively small. We're talking about thousands of pages in the Talmud. Right? These are handwritten. These take months to write, each one handwritten. They didn't have the printing press. So this is one of the biggest disasters spiritually for the Jewish people. And yeah, the whole story is about this. People realized it's because they said bad things about Maimonides. They realized that spiritually this is a punishment from God. Right? Accusation of host desecration. Right? The host is I think it's the food they eat, which they think is the body of Jesus somehow, into some sects of Christianity. Blood libel. More burning Talmud. Again, look at this. Of course, we're going to have a massacre as well in Fez. Now it's in Morocco. Right? So people say that the Jews live peacefully in the Muslim countries. It's not true. There was a time where certain places they did live peacefully, but even then there was anti-Semitism, but maybe not just as bad as some other times. Right, blood libels. Let's go through this quickly just to give you an idea. Look at this. Yeah, it's not one or two examples, is it? This is absolutely constant. It's every single decade's got something in it, if not every single year. And these are the only recorded ones, right? Right? Then basically even Wikipedia gives up and says, you want 19th century? Oh, you've got to go to a different page for that. So let's have a quick look at the 1900s one, 19th century. Okay, it's got its own list there. Okay, so blood libel. The 20th century, probably not so much. It's probably just the Holocaust, isn't it? Well, a lot of stuff happened. The famous Dreyfus trial, where they accused him of killing a child or something, and it was trumped up charges. Yeah, even during World War One. Wow, they still find ways to look at this. The Leo Frank trial and lynching in Atlanta, Georgia, in America. Anti-Semitism in the United States. 40,000 Jews removed from Lithuania. The middle of the First World War. Right, and then 1920s. The Jewish Menace, Henry Ford. And yeah, every week for 91 issues, the paper exposed some sort of Jewish-inspired evil major story in a headline. Well, what's that about? Seriously, think about that. Is that natural? Right? Does that happen with any other group? Any other group, someone goes out the way to demonize a group for 91, was it, weeks consecutively? Jews in Mongolia expelled by anti-Bolshevik Russian forces retreating after being defeated in Central Asia. Jaffa riots in Palestine. Now going to happen in the land of Israel. Before it was called the State of Israel. You're going to see some massacres by the Muslims there as well. Again, Soviet Russia, in Yemen. Right? Any country we haven't mentioned so far? The Ku Klux Klan in Prophesies, 144 page written by Bishop White in 1925. Espouses White's deep fear and hatred of the Catholic Church, while also promoting anti-Semitism, racism against African Americans. Yeah, so of course the hatred of Catholics, because I guess they were Protestants. Oh, but we've got to throw in the anti-Semitism as well. Okay, fine, other things. 1925, we got Mein Kampf from Hitler. Right, again, more stuff. And 1930s, things get very, very, very bad. As we all know, more pogroms in Aden, which is in Yemen. Afghani Jews expelled. Thrace pogroms, right? A region in Turkey, right? Algerian Jews were killed. 1934. The Franklin prophecy of the pages of pro-Nazi weekly magazine Liberation, according to U.S. Congress report, in America had Nazi propaganda. The Franklin prophecy is a classic anti-Semitic canard that falsely claims that American statesman Benjamin Franklin made anti-Jewish statements during his Constitutional Convention in 1787. It has widening acceptance in Muslim and Arab media, where it has been used to criticize Israel and Jews. See, they play into each other even, right? The different anti-Semites team up with each other here, right? Oswald Moses, black shirts here. Yeah, Nuremberg laws against the Jews, right? Right, the idea of the Jewish thinking. We have the idea here that the Jews were they were assimilating too much into German society. So God had to get the Germans to push them back in their place. So marriage between Jews and Germans are forbidden, right? Employing female citizens of German or kindred blood as domestic servants was prohibited. Jews cannot display the Reich or national flag. They were not allowed to be pro-national. On the other hand, they are permitted to display the Jewish colours. Right? Jaffa pogroms and 1936. Well, you can read all that. Right? You've got Kristallnacht. It's probably Kristallnacht here somewhere. Right? Here's Kristallnacht 1938. The riots, almost 100 Jews killed, 10,000 sent to concentration camps, right? And then, yes, you got the Holocaust, and, yeah. Anti-Semitic exhibition in Zagreb, that's in Yugoslavia, Croatia, right? There's not even Germany. We think it's only the Germans who were being anti-Semitic in the 1940s. It was not. Serbia, you've got here Croatia, right? The Vichy regime, that's France, even France, which were enemies of Germany, did things to the Jews. Wow. isn't interesting. The Bermuda Conference was an international conference between the United Kingdom and the United States held at Hamilton, Bermuda. The topic of discussion was the question of Jewish refugees who have been liberated by Allied forces and those who remained in Nazi-occupied Europe. The only agreement made was that the war must be won against the Nazis. Youth immigration quotas were not raised, nor was British prohibition on Jewish refugees seeking refuge in the British Mandate of Palestine lifted. So basically, they said, if you escape from Germany, you've got nowhere to go, basically. You can't go to Palestine, which was where the land of Israel is. Okay, Krakow pogrom. Now look, straight after the Second World War, okay, Khrushchev ready closes synagogues in Ukraine, right? This is after the Second World War. 6 Jewish Holocaust survivors were killed in Hungary, right? The Miskolc program, okay. Anti-Jewish rights in Aleppo in Syria, right? Then now we're going to get into all the anti-Arab, the Arab anti-Semitism. It's going to be mainly Arabs from here, but we've still got mixed up. You've got Prague trials, of course, Soviet Russia, a lot of anti-Semitism there. Poland, Alabama, right? Think America's so righteous. Think again, right? Anti-Semitism's everywhere. Okay. Okay, I'll let you have a look at the rest in your own time, but just to show you, this goes on and on and on, almost every single year. Now it's every year, basically. Many times a year, 91, 92, 3, 91, 93, 4, 5, 6, 97. Yeah, and then you've got finally 21st century. Let's see how quickly we can just scroll through this. 2005, 2006, there's one for each year. 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15. Anti-Semitic insults. Right, that doesn't sound too bad. Ken Livingstone, yes, I remember this. In England. So the reason why there's so many is we're talking about any records of anti-Semitism. So I guess the recording and the news is much more prolific then. Okay, spent a long time on that. Okay, so we've just seen the history of anti-Semitism. Must be to about 2,000 years. Must be thousands of examples of anti-Semitism there. Okay, right. So we've got an idea of the ubiquitous nature of anti-Semitism, how prolific and pervasive it is. It has been throughout time, throughout every country in the world. Which someone told me recently there are 2 or 3 countries which haven't had anti-Semitism: India, China, and Scotland. Yeah, I think they mean no serious anti-Semitism where they had pogroms and things like that, but there's definitely anti-Semitism in India, for example, by the Portuguese. Okay, maybe not by the Indians, right? The Indians are sort of like live and let live. Interesting. Okay, but you see, basically, the Jews have been in, I don't think almost probably every country in the world. Maybe small Micronesian nations they haven't been in, but every country in the world there's been Jews living there since the expulsion from Israel by the Romans 2,000 years ago. Right, every place they go, anti-Semitism. Right, just recently there's this famous philosopher, like a university lecturer called Sam. What's his name? Yeah, someone called Sam Richards. Yeah, it's quite a famous speaker. So this Sam Richards, he was saying he just doesn't understand anti-Semitism. So he gave an example when he went down to this very remote tribe in the Brazilian rainforest, and he asked. He was speaking with these. They're lost headhunters, apparently. Whatever headhunters are, they like collecting skulls or something like that. They basically collect skulls and things like that and preserve them. Right, so you've got a whole collection of these little skulls which have been preserved. So he's an anthropologist, a sociologist sort of person, and he was speaking with them, and they asked him his name. He said, Sam Richards. So, and they asked him I think in Spanish probably. So, are you Jewish? So, because they assume that's Samuel. Yeah, you're Jewish, because Sam is a Jewish name. So, no, I'm not Jewish. So he says, all right. He said basically Spanish words for thank God. And he said, what? You've never even seen a Jew and you're saying, oh, thank God. This remote. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't follow any patterns of any rational way of any patterns where we can recognize of hatred of any people comes from. Right? It just doesn't happen with any other nation, any other people, any other religion, any other group, right? Any other category of groups. It could be any other religion, any ethnicity, right? Any nationality. Just doesn't happen. You saw that huge list. It does not happen ever that you get such a prolific list of constant hatred against the nation, unending. Okay. Now, we don't finish there. We've got more, right? Anti-Semitism is not just pervasive and just constant, but the reasons behind them are contradictory. What's wrong with Jews? Okay, let's say someone could have, well, it could be, if there's such a thing as Jews are constantly antagonizing everyone, right? They're always threatening to blow stuff up. Okay, you can understand why. Imagine if Islamic terrorists will be doing terrorist attacks much more often in the name of, let's say, Pakistani form of Islam. And people might, in all countries, start hating Pakistanis, the Pakistanis they got in their country, because they know a high percentage of them are against their countries. We don't have that with Judaism, right? But let's say there was one reason. Let's go through the reasons, right? Which we know historically are the reasons people persecuted the Jews. Let's go through the reasons, right? We're going to see that anti-Semitism doesn't just exist in many places; it exists in contradictory forms. Yeah, the charges change with the times. Often they directly cancel each other out in the same story, in the same situation. Let's look at some examples. The Jews were blamed in Germany for controlling the banks. All the rich Jews, right? Hitler said, the Jews are controlling the economy. But, okay, so is that why people are anti-Semitic? Because they're jealous of the Jews? They're scared of the Jews? 1 minute, in Russia it wasn't like that. The Jews were resented because they were impoverished beggars. They were extremely poor in Russia, right? So what is it? Jews are hated for being rich or poor? Right. And you say, no, for a different reason. What's the other reason? Give me the reason. This is the reason given. They gave these reasons. We've got two examples of anti-Semitism where we know the reason given and they were opposite reasons. Show me an example of any nation which has had that, even once. I'm challenging people now, okay? This is how far it's going. This is how ridiculous anti-Semitism is. Right? In Catholic Europe, Jews were despised for clinging on to the old laws, right? Right? Oh, you're so religious, right? You're very, very fanatical about your old laws, and right? Okay, fine. The Jews are too religious. What happened in Russia? In the USSR, the Jews were purged as atheistic intellectuals. These godless Jews. Make your mind up. Are they godless or are they too religious? Right? 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 In Poland, right? As we say back in the home, in Lita and Poland, a lot of Ashkenazi Jews have been for centuries, right? The Jews were hated because they always kept themselves to themselves. Oh, you're not, well, you're above us. You look down on us. You don't want to mix in with us. You're keeping yourselves to yourselves too much. You're too separate. In France, the Jews were hated for being too assimilated. Why are you mixing up with us? Yeah, you're Jews. Keep yourself to yourselves. We saw that in Germany as well, right? The Jews wanted to assimilate into German culture. This is why the Reform movement in the 1800s came about. Reform Judaism, right, started because of the problem of the Jews. What do you do? All this anti-Semitism, people thought about it. What's the reason? People who didn't want to admit that, there's a problem with us. We've got to be doing repenting or whatever, or God's waiting for the nations to repent until they're completely guilty. Whatever the reason is, they didn't understand. Why is there so much anti-Semitism? They just learn the Torah. They should have listened to my lecture. That's what they should have done. This lecture. They'd understand it. So they can't understand why there's so much anti-Semitism. It must be because we are too different from them. People don't like people who are different. So if we just be friendly with the Germans or the French, then we'll assimilate, we'll intermarry, whatever, we'll do their customs. Be, as I said, and Mendelssohn said, be a Jew in the house, but be a non-Jew in public. That didn't work either. Because now the non-Jews, France and Germany, despise the Jews for hey, why you want to be like this? You're Jews. We don't want you to be part of our society. So on one hand, they're too separate, and on the other hand, they're too assimilated. In the ghettos, right, in Eastern Europe, the Jews were seen as parasitic and weak. Look at these like low lives, the subhumans, right? In Israel today, all these Jews, they're so powerful. They've got nuclear bombs. They've got the most high-tech militaries. Look how terrible, what oppressors they are. Yeah, they're just too strong. Too weak or too strong? What's wrong? Right? No one says about Tuvalu. Oh, we hate Tuvalu because they're too weak. Right? Or Trinidad and Tobago. Right? Right? And even China, where they're a massive empire now, right? A massive, very powerful country. Do people hate them in such a venomous way because they're too powerful? They're worried about them. They don't hate them with such deep hatred. So again, are the Jews too weak? Or are they too powerful? Right? When Jews were quiet, they're suspected, why are the Jews being quiet? They must be plotting behind closed doors. Right? So why they're not... Oh, but when the Jews went out and they protested, yeah? So they accused, you're just trying to get sympathy from us. You're trying to manipulate us like that. So what can they do? What can the Jews do to be not persecuted? Anything they do, they're going to get persecuted for. It can't be because of the reasons. It can't be because of keeping too quiet or too vocal. Because if those are reasons, that should happen with any nation which protests for their rights. Right? It's ridiculous. Right? Too nationalist or too other country nationalists. The Zionist Jews are condemned as ethno-supremacists. Yeah, we're proud of our country. Yeah, Judaism, right? But yet we see that when they're in Germany, they were proud of being German. Oh, you're not allowed to have a German flag. You can't be proud of being German. Okay, so can we be proud of being Jewish? Or maybe nowadays be proud of being Israel, proud of Israel? No, that's Zionist. You can't have your own country either. So which country can we have? Can we have the one which we're living in? Or can we only have one just for the Jews? Neither. There's no consistent rationale in any of this. It doesn't matter what the Jews do or don't do, the accusations adapt like a virus, mutating as needed to sustain the hatred. Right? This is not political theory. It's not economic cause and effect. You can't attribute this to any of these reasons. It's an obsession. There's something within mankind. Obviously, each person's got their free choice. But there's something ingrained in mankind. The Jews are different on such a deep level that we have to hate them. Why? Okay, this is a proof lecture, so we don't have to know what the why is. We just have to recognize the phenomenon in the first place. Right? Okay. So, but yeah. Why do people hate the Jews? We'll speak about that later, maybe. Right? Right at the end, I think we'll speak about that. Okay? It's an obsession. It's patternless hatred. It's just hatred. And yet, paradoxically, it follows a pattern, its own pattern. Every year, every 2 years, you get a significant, or every 10 years, you get a significant killing of Jews, or massacring of Jews, or subjugation of Jews, or what's the word? Persecution of Jews. What's it called when people are biased against Jews? Discrimination against Jews. Yeah. Okay. So now let's go back to what we spoke about at the beginning. Right? The two key ideas from the beginning. If something breaks all the rules, all the known laws of history, it suggests that we're not dealing with a natural phenomenon. Right? Okay? And if that same thing was predicted in detail thousands of years ago, then we're not just dealing with chance. Right? Even if it wasn't predicted. If it was predicted, that's a slam dunk. You've got a double verification. Right? Nowadays, people want the computers ask you for a password and some other sort of verification. Two-step verification is very, very solid. Here, we've got the complete departure from any natural law of oppression and persecution we find in history amongst any, not just nation, any group of any description, nation, religion, ethnicity, right, ideology. There isn't anything like that, right? And we're going to see it was all predicted as well. Two independent reasons why anti-Semitism is a proof there's a God, he runs the world, and he is in control of the world, or at least he knows the future. But just knowing the future wouldn't be good enough. You have to say he controls the world, because otherwise this miraculous concept called anti-Semitism couldn't come about in the first place, unless it was interfered with by a being which was outside nature. Let's step back. There's only two options, okay? Right? Let's put this in perspective, put this in focus, make it as clear as we can. There's only two options when we come to what is the origin of the Torah, okay? Either it was written by humans, whether one man, I don't care about who it was, right? One man, many people, maybe it was evolved over centuries, but essentially it's within the laws of nature. It was made by humans with no input from any outside supernatural input. Or the other option is everything besides that, which is written by a being which stands outside of time, right? Or even controls history itself. Okay? Right? Outside of time would be good enough just to predict what happens, right? But for these events to even happen in the first place, you have to say there's a being which controls history. That's it. Those are exhaustive choices. There aren't any other options. So if we refute the option that says anti-Semitism, right, is not. If we refute the fact that it follows, if we refute any possibility that anti-Semitism follows patterns, right? And on top of that, and independent of that, another proof would be, if we refute any possibility that the Torah could be written by humans which predict anti-Semitism, right, in the way that it actually manifests itself, then you have to go to the other option. Therefore, there has to be a being outside of time who controls history itself and who wrote those predictions, his knowledge in the Torah. You have to say that. That is an ironclad proof. I don't see a way out of it. Right? Yeah, people say, oh yeah, and say, yeah, but these, sometimes the Romans were Carthage, they destroyed Carthage as well, even though the other 100 countries they didn't destroy Carthage, but the Jews they also happened to destroy. All right, okay, right, that in itself would be, but then it happened again and again, and the Muslims and the Far East in America, always against the Jews, and that ridiculous case in Brazilian rainforest where he's never even seen a Jew, and he says, "Thank God, oh, you're not a Jew." I don't know what he would have done to Sam, Richard, if he would have said, "Yeah, I'm Jewish." Would it be part of his next collection of skulls? Maybe, I don't know if it would be that bad, but yeah, ridiculous, right? So keep this dichotomy in mind as we look at the next section, because now you're going to see each prediction, and we examine, because each prediction we examine must be judged, which side of the dichotomy can account for it. Okay, look at each side. Bear that in mind. Is the Torah written by humans or not by humans? Basically, we said the only other option is by some sort of transcendent knowledge. Okay, right? Anything you can think of is going to fall into one of those two categories. Okay, and if it doesn't, make it fit into one of those two categories and then come to the conclusion anyway. Right? Very simple. So we're going to see now that ancient Jewish texts, whether it's the written Torah, the Torah Shebechsav, or the oral Torah, that's like in the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Kabbalah. We won't go through all the sources. Don't really have time, but that's never an excuse with me, is it? Let's have a look. Okay. Right. So what are the sources for anti-Semitism? Okay, so let's start things off from the Torah itself. Right? So the question is, was this irrational hatred towards the Jews predicted in advance, in the Torah or in the classical Jewish sources? The answer is yes, and repeatedly. And we're going to start off with one of the most famous predictions of absolute disaster for the Jews, known as the Tochacha. There's two of them. There's one in Leviticus chapter 26 and one in Deuteronomy chapter 28. The Nachmanides says that they're actually referring specifically to two different time periods. So the one which is referring to the Roman exile, remember this is written over 1,000 years before the Roman exile, is in Deuteronomy 28. Right, so let's have a look. So let's open up the Tanakh, the Torah. Here we go. This is in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 28. Right, and it will be if you listen to the voice of God, etc., then all nice things will happen. And then things start to go bad, to say the least. Right, and if you don't listen to God, this is one of the longest portions in the whole Torah, which we read on the Sabbath, because we want to get the curses over and done with, but it lasts for about 60 odd verses, right? Something like that, right? You're cursed in here, cursed in there, curse the fruits of the womb, curse the fruits of the ground, the crops, when you come, when you go, confusion, illness, lack of success. Here's one about illnesses and fevers and things like that. Okay, so lots and lots of bad things happen here. Okay, but let's have a look at verse. Where is it? Right. Hashem will move you or lead you, and your king, which you establish upon yourself, to a nation, El Goy, to a nation, to a nation which you don't know, you and your host. Right, that's impressive as it is, because usually when people are persecuted or captured, it's by neighboring nations. But this is a nation which you've never heard of before, and that's exactly what happened with the Romans. Yeah, Israel is, if you look at a map, Israel is on the Mediterranean, You've got Syria to the north. The Greeks are quite far away. They're like another country or two over after Turkey. But they were invaded by the Greeks. But now there's another country which is even further than the Greeks, which are the Romans. You've never heard them before. You don't know about them. Suddenly they come and they invade, take over, and they banish you, right? Right? And you go to their countries. And in fact, you go to countries which you've never known. Go to places like England, what a strange place, or even America, right? Or India, right? You talk about a small country, Israel, right? At the time of the Second Temple, yeah, they knew the trade routes of different countries, but the Jewish people end up going to exiles all over the world. And you serve other deities made of wood and stone. Interesting. What's wood and stone? What are the two major world religions, especially the ones which we ended up going to? Christianity, who worship the cross made out of wood, right? Well, stone. That's the stone of the Kaaba of the Muslims in Mecca, right? Right. Doesn't mean you actually serve them. It means you serve the people who serve them. Okay. And then it says, and you should be an object of astonishment, an example, yeah, a topic of discussion amongst all the people to whom Hashem leads you there, right? Right. Okay, so this going into exile is going to be something which people speak about. It's like, what on earth is going on with these Jews, right? It doesn't make sense. Then when you get to the end of you've got terrible things which happen in the Holocaust here actually, and the destruction of the Second Temple, very sad things, right? You can look at it yourself if you want to get depressed. The suffering of the Jews, right? Right, even right. This is one. Even any illness and any affliction which is not written in this Torah, God will put upon you until He destroys you. Now we have the commentaries say on this. What does it mean? Chol Makah, any affliction which is not written in this Torah. It's pretty extensive suffering and tragedies. They say that's referring to the false messiahs, that we've been afflicted on top of everything. We've had dashed hope over and over again. We've got people who are saying, oh, these tragedies, it's terrible now. Mashiach must be coming. And then what happens? It's a false messiah, right? And the Jewish people get even just had a glimpse of hope, and even that's taken away from them, right? And look at this amazing prophecy here, right? This could be a lecture in itself, just the prophecies in here, not just the suffering aspect of it. You will remain a small in number, right? Right? You were very, very numerous, right? A very, very populous nation when at the time of the temple. Maybe in terms of population, one of the biggest populations in the world, possibly. I don't know. Right? Definitely very significant. Now, 15 million Jews, not very much at all, right? And we've been about 15 million Jews for about, well, I don't know if I can say this for 2,000 years. We've definitely been around that for a very, very long time. Yeah, we should be like in the billions, like the Chinese by now. Much more, because we've got much higher birth rate than the Chinese, but we keep getting killed. Amazing. Yeah, that is not natural by any nation, right? Okay. And God will spread you out amongst all the nations. From one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. Yeah, and you will serve gods there which you don't know, your father's stone and wood and stone again. And look at this. Look at this. Oh. In those nations you will not have rest. You will not be able to rest your foot. As soon as you go into a nation, the trouble starts. And it keeps going until you're chucked out. He'll give you a trembling heart, dashed hopes, like we said before, v'davar nefesh, a depressed soul, right? You will not believe in your life. What's going on? There's no stability for the Jews anywhere, right? Anywhere. Wow. Okay, that is intense. Yeah, that prophecy is literally what happens to the Jews throughout history. You'll be exiled from nation to nation. You will not have rest. You won't find a country where there won't be a time or a country where the Jewish people will be totally relaxed and feeling comfortable. There'll always be some antagonism, maybe on a small level. We saw definitely on a big level. It happens very often as well. This was written over 3,000 years ago. Even if you say the Torah was written not 3,000 years ago. Even if you want to say it was written 2,500 years ago, we definitely know there was a Torah 2,500 years ago, right? That can be demonstrated. You've got manuscripts and things like that, Dead Sea Scrolls, the historical figures which basically quote things from the Torah, right? Anyway, yeah. But look, we're talking about worst comes to the worst. Let's say it was only written like in the year 0. Let's say we've got evidence that it definitely goes before that, right? Besides my Divinity of the Torah lecture, which I gave about the transmission, the solid transmission we have of the Jewish tradition, we gave 12 approaches for that. But let's say you don't. But it's given thousands of years ago, and it's happened until this very day. Right? What nation in history matches this description like the Jews? First of all, right? Exile to Babylon, to Persia, to Rome, to Spain, to Germany, to Russia, to New York and Shanghai. They went literally everywhere. Yeah? And somehow, wherever they go, they're subject of suspicion, mockery, right? Even annihilation. It just happens. That's the law of nature, and you've got the law of the Jews. Two different laws. That means we're not natural. Right? And the Torah, which predicted this, cannot be natural either. Right? Let's have a look quickly at the other Torah, the one in Leviticus. Let's look at that quickly. Oh, okay, it's quite not as long as the list of anti-Semitism, but that's the oral Torah. That's the manifestation of the written Torah. This is the written Torah, so we have to scroll a bit, but not too much. Okay, so let's have a look. Oops. Okay, right. Okay, again, this starts a similar way. If you go in my ways, very nice. I'll give the rain on time, right? And all that good stuff. Now, let's go and look a bit further. Right, and if you don't listen to me, I will destroy your strength. That means destruction of the temple. Let's talk about the first temple, this chapter, according to Nachmanides. I'll bring sword upon you, and I'll bring Deva, which is pestilence. It's a terrible thing here. Let's have a look. Right? And I will destroy the land, right? And the enemies who's sitting there will be absolutely v'shomer. They will be astounded by it. I'm not sure what the translation is here, but that's how I translate v'shomer, like shomer, being astounded. Okay, it's desolate is something which is astounding, I guess. That's how they decide to translate it. I wouldn't translate it like that. Okay, Veschem ezoreva goyim, and you I will spread out in the nations. And then in the nations I will make sword chase after you. It's not good enough exile. You'll be in the other nations and you'll still get killed. Right? Either people get killed in their nations or they go into exile. It's very unusual that they go into another nation. Usually what happens, they assimilate. But instead, they'll somehow keep their identity and they'll be hated and they'll be killed there. And your land, Israel, will be desolate, and that's what it's been for the last 2,000 years. The land of Israel, no one's lived in it, more or less. There have always been a few people living in there, but it's never been a thriving country under any occupation. It's just been a wasteland, basically, right? Right? So we know the Jewish people in the 1800s who tried settling the land, the immense poverty they were in. Yeah, right. Right. You will be in the lands of your enemies, and the ones who remain, right, I'll bring fear in their heart in the lands of their enemies, right, and even the sound of a leaf rustling will cause them to run, right? Right, and they'll run as if they were running away from swords. Yeah, eventually you get PTSD. Jews who are constantly persecuted eventually say, "Oh, what's happening now? Oh, we can see the patterns again. There's going to be anti-Semitism again. Oh, we might be in trouble again." There's no one chasing them. Right, they don't get peace of mind even. Right. We will get lost amongst the nation, and the lands of your enemy will consume you. Right? Amazing. Tragic, but amazing the predictions. Yeah, we go into the nations, and look what happens with the assimilation which has happened. 70% of Jews now are intermarried, and their children, their grandchildren don't even know they're Jewish. Right? Right. So again, we've got a prediction of the dispersion and the oppression, a fate which would be repeated again and again in different forms by regimes who shared nothing in common except hatred of the Jew. This isn't just prophecy; it's an impossible call. You cannot say this. It's impossible to make such a prediction. This doesn't follow any patterns of any nation. The fact that it happens in the first place is mind-boggling. And then you've got someone who predicts it beforehand? There's one more proof which I haven't spoken about yet, which is utterly convincing. It's one of the strongest proofs, I think, for the divinity of the Torah and the existence of God, right? Or definitely a being above time. Let's keep it limited to the actual proof itself. There's a being above time which seems to control time as well, but definitely above time. He can see the future. And there's something going on, that something outside of nature is controlling the laws of nature, because he's putting an exception into the rule. Right? So remember, let's steelman this. Let's make it not steelman. That's the wrong word. Let's make it crystal clear again. What did we say before? It's either two options. It's either going to be man-made, or it has to be someone outside nature. Right? What human author could have possibly anticipated that a tiny, obscure tribe will endure for millennia, very small numbers the whole time, scattered amongst the hostile nations? That means, like in England, 300,000 Jews. In France, I don't know how much it is, probably a similar number, something like that. Argentina, 100,000, right? All the countries they're in, they're a tiny minority. Yeah? Even in America, where until recently, until about 15 years ago, that most of the Jews, the highest number of Jews in any one place was in America, still only about 5 million. 5 million is like about 2% of the population, and that's very, very high. Now you've got Israel's got more Jews than in any other place, right? It's almost the majority of Jews live in Israel, almost, which is one of the preconditions of the building of the temple. So we're getting very close to that, just as an aside, right? So how can a tiny tribe, the Jewish people, endure for millennia, right, scattered amongst hostile nations, and they're hated and persecuted and tried to, and killed, And on top of that, they still survive. And not only that, they thrive. And not only that, they influence the nations which hate them. The two major world religions are based on Judaism, Christianity and Islam, right? And look at the morals, the ethics, the Judeo-Christian morals or principles they speak about in the West, right? They look up to us. The 25% of Nobel prizes in science are Jews. We're thriving. We are contributing to society on a way. We're punching way above our weight. But yet we're still hated. It makes no sense at all. There are so many of these aspects. But let's just stick to what we're talking about. The fact that we are persecuted so relentlessly throughout the ages, everywhere in the world, almost everywhere in the world, and constantly, and it was predicted, that is impossible if you don't invoke a being which transcends time and transcends the laws of nature. He controls nature, or we can at least interfere in it. Because nature, natural things have to have a pattern to them. They really should have an explanation for them, right? A naturalistic explanation. But the Jews don't. Okay, let's carry on now with looking at other prophecies from the Talmudic writings, from the rabbinic writings. Okay, that's all part of our Masorah, our traditions, not just the written Torah, it's the oral traditions which have been passed on as well, as we mentioned many times on this channel. Let's have a look. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the Talmud. The Talmud in Brochus, in Maseches Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, which deals with the laws of the Sabbath, 89a. It asks a question. Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. It does some sort of finding a hint in the words of the names of Sinai. Sinai was called 5 different names. One of them was Sinai. Why is it called Sinai? Because Sino, hatred, descended upon the Jewish people, or on the world, against the Jewish people when the Torah was given. Okay, amazing. So, the very event is interesting. It's kind of connected with our previous lecture about proofs for the Torah based on Sinai. Maybe it's kind of tangentially sort of connected with anti-Semitism, because the Torah was given to the Jews. This is the real cause of hatred for the Jews. And since I guess that's it's very interwoven with that. So we found a 7th reason why people hate other nations and oppress them, right? Because of the Torah. But since the Torah was a unique event, right? God only revealed himself once in history to a whole nation, right? And part of that is the giving of the Torah. That itself is a reason to hate Jews, right? Either because of jealousy or because of maybe, we'll see, we'll get into that later, right? So we see that the very event which defines Jewish identity, the giving of the Torah, is also the source of hatred towards the Jews, right? Yeah, let's think about that. What's the reason? Yeah. So our commentators, our sages, offer 2 insights, right? The Torah creates an objective, absolute moral standard that the nations did not want to accept, right? There were a few people in each nation who did want to accept the Torah, but God wanted a nation, one cohesive, unified nation, to accept, to fully, the whole nation to accept the Torah, and the only one which did that was the Jewish nation, right? And we spoke about before that God doesn't withhold reward from anyone. So those non-Jews, those individuals from the other nations who did want the Torah, but they couldn't because they were unfortunately in a different nation. Their souls were reincarnated in Gerim, in converts. So throughout the... Oh, wow, this is beautiful. I just realized something. Throughout the generations, there have always been people who want to convert to Judaism. It's totally fine being a non-Jew. Yeah, you can get to heaven being a non-Jew. Non-Jews have got their own task in this world, albeit a simpler one, but also a very important one. That means to make a moral, righteous society, functioning society. Right? But there's some non-Jews who are just not satisfied with that. Right? Many, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of non-Jews today on Noachites. They accept the Torah, but they don't want to convert. They're happy to be the righteous of the non-Jewish nations. But there's some Noachites, you'd call them, who are not satisfied with that. They want to go further. They want to actually become part of the Jewish nation and accept the much greater burden of the whole 613 commandments as opposed to just the 7 for the non-Jews. And that comes because deep down, these were the non-Jewish souls who wanted to accept the Torah originally. Very interesting idea. Anyway, so the Torah creates a moral standard that nations generally do not want to accept. There's a very high moral standard in the Torah. And the Jews, basically by accepting the Torah, become a permanent reminder that someone did, and people resent that. I'll speak more about that in a minute. But the point is that whatever the rationale behind it, we're going to see in a minute what that is, more depth. The fact is the Torah predicted this. The rabbis said clearly that the Mount Sinai itself is a cause for hatred for the Jews. Okay? So the hatred is not accidental. It's intrinsic to the Jewish nation. The only way to get rid of it, my teacher in school said, maybe he's quoting someone, the only way to get rid of the problem of anti-Semitism, you know how to get rid of it? There's a way. You get rid of the Jews. That's the only way to get rid of anti-Semitism. So people trying all different methods to get rid of it, it's futile. You can mitigate it, but you can't get rid of it. The only time it'll finally go away is when God's finally revealed to the whole world and everyone will be happy to accept the idea of God, which is what the message of the Jews to the nations is, essentially. So then obviously anti-Semitism will go as well. Right? So we see from the texts, from the verses in Leviticus and Deuteronomy as just two examples, where we see that anti-Semitism in quite a lot of detail was actually predicted by the Torah. Okay, so let's get back to the reasons behind the hatred. Right, we've shown it's predicted. Why does it happen at all? Right, we said that it's not just a political reaction; it's something deeper. Right, because of the Torah somehow. And it's very interesting. I was about to point out there. It just occurred to me now that the converts, we find that one of the greatest drivers of conversion to Judaism, right, it might not make sense rationally, is when the Jews are being oppressed. Usually you would think that, oh, they're converting to this nation because, oh, they're so powerful. We want to become American because American seems to be the driving force of the world, the place of of opportunity. You wouldn't want to see you wouldn't see people sort of having a drive to become Ukrainian now. All the destruction which is going on in Ukraine. I want to go to Ukraine, right? To stand up for, it might be a few people, right? Who feel compassionate about people being oppressed, whatever. being attacked. So they go to Ukraine. They were not virtue signals. I guess most of them are being virtue signals. But there might be some genuine people who really feel bad for the Ukrainians for being attacked, and they want to fight with the Ukrainians. Fine. But it usually, logically, I would say, intuitively, you would say people would want to join a nation which is in ascendancy, not one which is in existential threat. Yet we see the times where the Jews are the most persecuted are the ones where we get converts, right? It's happening now. A lot of people coming, as I said, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of Noachites at the moment, accepting the Torah without converting to Judaism, right? Accepting the reality, the truth of the Torah and the truth of the God of Israel, the monotheistic view we have of God as a total oneness. Amazing. But why they come through the suffering? So, ironically, Sinai was the cause for hatred and anti-Semitism, right? Right? As we said. But also Sinai, the non-Jews who wanted to be part of the accepting of the Torah didn't get their chance. So there, when they are reincarnated in a later generation, and they have a look at the suffering of the Jews, maybe that wakes something up. Why are the Jews being attacked so much? Why are they being hated? Sinai, because of the Torah. And there's something deep inside of them which tells them, hey, I wanted to accept the Torah in a previous, even though he might not be thinking that consciously, but there might be a silent voice deep down inside in his ancient history telling him that, yeah, I wanted to accept the Torah, but I didn't get the chance. I want to become Jewish. Maybe. Interesting idea to think about. Okay. So why does it happen at all, right? So we said it's a kind of, because we brought morals to the world. So that might remind you of something if you've heard it before, obviously. That a certain German leader in the 1930s, we all know who we're talking about, one of the biggest murderers of Jews in history, right? He said, right, this is Adolf Hitler for the people who haven't worked it out, conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. Right? You hear that? Those are the words of Hitler, right? Conscience. Yeah? Well, how does he know that? It was such a strange conscience. You have all the atheists today saying, no, you can be moral. You don't need God to have ethics or morals. Yeah, Hitler knew more than them, right? Conscience is a Jewish invention. The truth is he was wrong. It's not a Jewish invention. The truth is there is an innate conscience and morals and ethics in people. But he's talking about this higher level of an absolute moral standard, right? And other place he says, the Jew is the conscience of mankind. He must be destroyed. So we see that even Hitler, in his grotesque clarity, understood the Jews present a standard, right? An unwelcome one, right? A moral memory the world wants to forget, right? That's what anti-Semitism is, right? The Jew becomes a walking mirror. And when people don't like what they see in the mirror, they try to smash the mirror. The Jews are the mirror of mankind. And that's why people hate us so much. Yeah? However, you find, and that's why you've got this phenomenon that whenever you have this is what historians and people who study history say, that anti-Semitism is always a precursor for something much worse, right? It reveals a moral rot in that nation which is anti-Semitic, and it won't stop at the Jews. It'll start with the Jews, but then it'll carry on and be worse, and that's what you see in the anti-Semitism of 1930s. It ended up being the Nazis causing millions of deaths around Europe, right? Not just the Jews, right? Just with the war itself, right? So, yes, I had, what was the other example? They said recently, that's what, his name is Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray, he's a contemporary, he's a person who's alive today. He's a commentator on current events. He's a philosopher, he's a reporter, I think, essentially. He's written a lot of books. The Strange Death of the West, I think that's one of his famous books, right? Yeah, so he's very sympathetic to Jews, and he's an atheist. I'm not sure if he is anymore. The way he talks, maybe he's changing as well. But I think he describes this phenomenon that he says that when people start on the Jews, it doesn't end with the Jews, right? So he's speaking about the way that the far left in America and in Europe are very pro-Palestinians, very anti-Israelis, right? So death to Israel and things like that, from the river to the sea, all those sorts of things, yeah? He's saying, don't think they're just caring about the Jews. That's why he's saying that people have to pay attention to what's happening with Israel. Is because what's happening with Israel is coming for America and the West next, right? When the radical Islamists do the same thing, right? There's a death to Israel, and they say that Israel is the little Satan and America is the big Satan. Yeah, they're trying to destroy America left. So what's this phenomenon? Is because it's based on this idea we just said, that once people who have got some darkness inside of them, right? They want to be malevolent, and they think they can get away with it. They've got their rationalizations, their excuses, but then they see the Jew. The Jew is that mirror which tells them, 1 minute, you're a human being. You're created in the image of God. Not just the Jews. Every human being is created in the image of God. You've got free will. You can transcend this world. Yeah? You can become infinite, like God. You just got to choose the right thing. But they don't want to. They're so... what's the word? They're so beholden. Yeah, they're so beholden to their evil, which they want to perpetrate or just identify with. They see the Jew, that kills them. That causes such an internal fracture. They can't handle it. We've got to kill the Jew. Why? Find something. We can't pretend to be moral people because we're trying to excuse our bad actions. But we want to eliminate this Jew now, so we have to excuse that. So, they're poor, they're rich, they're nationalists. They're not nationalists. They're powerful, they're weak. They keep themselves to themselves. No. They're colluding with the enemies. The enemies are saying exactly the same thing. When there's a moral rot, people need to take it out on the Jews first, because otherwise, there's that natural remnant of goodness and desire to be consistent with one's own ethics and morals has to be dealt with. So the way they deal with it is just by blocking it out and getting rid of the people who keep reminding everyone that there's ethics and morals. Yeah? Okay, so that's the idea. They smash the mirror. Okay. So let's have a look at another verse, another chapter actually. So here we go. So we're looking for the book of Psalms, chapter 83. Right? This one, by the way, is another source of prediction of anti-Semitism in a different way. You'll see. Right? God, do not be quiet, because your enemies are Yemoyim, they're roaring, stirring, it says here. Sanecha, the ones who hate you, Nosu Rosh, they lift up their head. Al amacha yarimu soid, they plot against your nation. And against your protected ones, they take counsel. Omru, they say, Lechuv nachide megoy. They say, let's go and destroy them from a nation. And that it will not be remembered the name of Israel anymore. They plot with a oneness of their heart, right? Yeah, against you, God, they will form covenants, that they will make pacts. Look what it says next. Ohole Edom v'Yishmaelim, the tents of Edom, that's Rome, right? V'Yishmaelim, the Arabs, right? We already spoke about that in the previous lecture in the other series, the one about the Armageddon lecture, about the pact between the West and the Arabs. The West need to take the power of speech of the Arabs, power of propaganda, in order to help the Edoms. Edom are more associated with the physical world and the idea of military dominance, whereas the Ishmaelim are more, their power is in their tongue, the speech. That's the idea of a war of propaganda, which is literally what the Hamas are doing at the moment. It's just they know they're not going to win territory. That's why they're sacrificing their own people in order that people feel sorry for the Gazans and start hating the Israelis, and maybe ignite that little spark of anti-Semitism they have and fan it into a big flame, which they're unfortunately succeeding with doing. But we've already spoken about this in the lecture number 9, 8 and 9 of the Armageddon series. That's essentially God working, is manipulating them to do that in order to give people a final free will where they can choose between a clear good and a clear evil. Right? So if you've got a tiny spark of anti-Semitism in you, you've either got to work to get rid of it, or you can embrace it and go for an amoral or immoral society. Gevol v'Amon v'Amalek. Amalek, the ultimate enemy of the Jewish people. We've spoken about him in one of the Purim lectures. Right? He represents the idea of the antithesis of the Jewish people. Just no God at all in the world. Right? No morals, no ethics. So, like the Germans, the Nazis, literally, we always understood, Jewish people always understood the Nazis are a branch of Amalek. Right? That fits very well. Peleshes, that's interesting. Palestinians? Emir Tzor, and the ones who, wow, the ones who dwell in Tzor, that's Lebanon. That's incredible. Gam Ashur nilvo imam, even Ashur, Assyria, that is Iraq, okay. Those were Bnei Lot Selo. They were ones who helped Bnei Lot. That's interesting because the Bnei Lot are associated with the surrounding areas of Israel. That could be maybe the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, maybe. Interesting. And then Asaph, the one who makes this psalm, one of the few which wasn't written by David. He prays that you just help us destroy our enemies, the ones who are trying to destroy us, the ones who are your enemies. That's what it says, right? The ones who hate you raise their hand, who are the ones who are against your protected ones, right? Let's destroy them, the Jewish people, from coming nation. The name of Israel will no longer be remembered, right? Because they've taken counsel with one accord against you. Right? I wonder if Rashi says anything here. Right? Rashi says, Briszu, this covenant, Eino Elo Lecho, this covenant against the Jewish people is really against you, God. Nashkich Shemecho, to make your name forgotten. She'ena Tokori Elokim Elo Lonu, the only people who call you God of the physical world is us. Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Israel. And once the Jewish name is gone, Af Shimcha HaGadol, so too your great name, right? It will also not be remembered. And Rashi says, I found this explanation somewhere. It doesn't say where he found it. Amazing idea. So now we're really getting to the kishkas, as they say. We're getting to the crux of the matter here. The Jews hold up that mirror of morality to the people of the world. They don't like that. Who are they really hating? They're hating God himself. Right? They could say, we're religious, we believe in God. They might call him different names. Each religion's got their own name for God. But that's their own edifice, which they propagate themselves. They're not interested in what the reality of God is. God wants an absolute moral society and goodness, people to be held to a high standard of morality and ethics, to control their desires, their hatred, their lusts. That's what God wants. But what happens? People don't want to accept the Torah. Like we said, all the nations refused to accept the Torah. When God was offering to all the prophets of the nations, the prophet went to the nation, he asked each one of them, I just got a message from the creator of the universe. Do you want to accept the Torah? They said, what's in it? Don't murder. Oh, we can't have that. Or don't commit adultery. Awkward, right? Or don't steal. Our whole society is based on stealing and getting ahead in life, whatever, at any cost. So they were refused. The Jewish people said, we don't care what's in it, we'll do it. It's God who's the definition of reality, so therefore his laws are obviously the best thing possible. So we don't care about what the technicalities are, we'll find a way to do it. Obviously God's not going to ask us to do something impossible. So the war against the Jews ultimately a rebellion against God himself. The Jew is not hated for wealth or land or power or isolation or assimilation. He's hated because he brings divine accountability into the world. That is a deeper driver of anti-Semitism, and that's why it spans across all eras of human history, right? Since the Jews have been in existence, more or less, right? All regimes, all countries. Doesn't matter where the Jews end up, you'll have anti-Semitism there, as long as there's people who have got evil in their hearts and they want to embrace evil. The first thing you do is you get rid of the Jews, because they're the constant reminder that every human being is potentially extremely holy. Every human being has got such infinite potential. But people, the evil inclination has to be balanced, so that drive to ignore what we could be and to just indulge in what we can get away with now. And people say, I'm committing to this, I just love the now. I love to give myself the pleasure for giving to my desires now. I don't want to restrain myself. It's too much effort, right? So I'm going to go that direction. But then they see the Jew, oh no, get away from me. Stop it, I want to enjoy my evil. So they have to find a way. If I'm going to rebel against God, I might as well go all the way and kill the Jews. That's anti-Semitism. Okay. And even, as we said, even Hitler understood that. There's another source. It's also the Gemara in Shabbos, 89a, the Talmud there. Which says there's another name for Har Sinai, for Mount Sinai. It's called Har Horeb. The Torah actually calls it Har Horeb many times, at least once I can think of. And the Talmud says, well, we explain why Har Sinai is called Mount Sinai. Yeah, Sinor means hatred. Fine, because once the Jews, as we explained, accepted the Torah, that created a hatred, because now everyone's going to have to measure themselves up with God's divine agenda and absolute morals, which now are fixed in reality because the Torah has been given down to the physical world. through the Jews, and Jews are representing that message now, those absolute morals and ethics. There's another name which also connects with what we're saying now. It's called Har Horeb, the mountain of destruction. Okay, so let's explain what that means. Right, because the Gemara in Shabbos says, because Churba Yardal Umasa'ilam, destruction came upon or to the nations of the laws, the nations of the world. What does it mean? Why they didn't get destroyed physically? So what does that mean? Maybe you're already putting the pieces together from based on our previous lecture of the Armageddon lecture about a different interpretation of what destruction can mean. Doesn't mean that here so much. It's a bit different idea, different angles. Let's have a look at it. The mountain where the Torah was given is also called Har Horeb, which means destruction. The Maharal explains, what does this mean? The Maharal lived in about 1500, something like that. A great Jewish philosopher, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers, in fact. Very deep thinker. He explains that the idea of destruction was not physical, it was existential. So before Sinai, the nations of the world could see themselves as independent of any other nation. They were morally self-sufficient. They had their own independent purpose in the world. Yeah, whether they recognized it as to reveal God in the world, or through their own characteristics of their nation, or whatever it happened to be, they felt a certain sense of autonomy or independence. However, when the Torah was revealed as an absolute divine moral system, this illusion was shattered. The Torah didn't only define the mission of the Jewish people, it redefined the mission of everyone, not just the Jews. The Jews had a fundamental change. They don't work with nature anymore. They work with a supernatural reality. That's what happened at Sinai. God says, now your nature is relying on me. I'm making this covenant with you. You keep my laws. You bring me into the world, and I will protect you supernaturally. And if you go against it, I'll supernaturally destroy you, which is anti-Semitism. Right? That's one form of it. That's the main form of God's chastising of the Jewish people, like we saw in Deuteronomy and Leviticus before. Right? If we didn't keep the Torah. Right? But when the Torah, right, so this is critical. The Torah didn't reject the nations; he repositioned them. That's what's going on here. It gave them a different vital role to uphold the universal framework of ethical law. That's the seven Noachite laws. These laws create a basis for a moral, stable society. Right? In this new paradigm, the Jewish people are tasked with infusing the world with spiritual meaning. Okay? But they can only do so with a partnership with the non-Jews, who are creating a world which is just, lawful, moral, ethically sound. Like a soul who needs a body. Yeah? The body needs a soul. They work together, like the very first lecture we gave on this channel. Right? Why evil has to exist has to do with the soul and the body. Right? The spiritual mission of Israel depends on the moral infrastructure maintained by the nations. But the nations, at the end of the day, their job is just essentially in order to help the Jews do their job. That creates a sort of an inferiority complex. Even though both jobs are necessary, it still creates a bit of feeling, it's not like the Jews have got job A and we've got job B, which is true, but the fact is now the non-Jews, the Jews of the job of the mission of the non-Jews in the world is job B, but job B is there in order to bring out job A. So that means the primary goal is spirituality. The way you bring out spirituality is through the physical. So that means that the non-Jews are essentially, their mission is secondary to the Jewish mission. That creates a form of destruction of their sense of primacy, I guess. They're being one of the prime nations in the world, right? It's replaced with this new system of sort of a partnership, but a partnership of spiritual and physical, where obviously spiritual is that's what holds, that's what the purpose is, to become spiritual. So even though the purpose, just like the soul and the body works exactly the same way, right? The soul is meant to be the spiritual revelation of God in the world, and the body is meant to be the one experiencing it, and together they go to the world to come, like we explained in that first lecture. Similarly, the Jews and non-Jews, Jews' job is to bring spirituality into the world. The non-Jews' job is to receive that spirituality and get elevated by it. But that's more of a passive role in terms of the final purpose. So, in terms of, how can we put it? In philosophical terms, it's called Chomer and Tzura. The idea of Chomer and Tzura is, Chomer is material or physicality. It's something which doesn't have formal definition by itself. Tzura is a concept, it's abstract ideas, but they have no physical manifestation or expression. It's the essence of something. This relationship between the Jews and the non-Jews are now parallel this relationship of Chomer and Tzura. Tzura means definitions, that means reality, and Chomer means just something. The whole purpose of the Chomer is to be molded and elevated and shaped into something meaningful, right? So if a sculptor has got a vision of a beautiful sculpture, then he takes the piece of clay and he molds it into that image, or that statue, whatever it happens to be. So essentially, the idea of destruction means something which can be destroyed. Concepts are permanent; they cannot change, right? Right? The concept is you can destroy all the tables in the world, but the concept of a table will never be destroyed. The chomer, the physical manifestation, can be destroyed, right? You can have a few pieces of wood which manifest and express the idea of a table. So now you've got a physical table, but that is dependent on it can only be a table in as much as it still manages to express the idea of a table. Once it's broken, it's been disconnected from that reality. That's the destruction of Har Chorev. The non-Jews are now in a situation where they're not destroyed in the normal sense of the word, is they have lost the ability to have something which is permanent intrinsically. They don't have any intrinsic permanence in their character anymore. Their character has meaning in as much as they can bring out the reality of God into the world, into the physical world. So their job is basically creating a physical plane, a dimension for that manifestation. The Jews are defined by their purpose. They're more of like an embodiment of spirituality. So that's why it's called destruction. In terms of Chomer and Tzura, it's very well understood. The Jews are analogous to concepts, and the non-Jews are now, or their mission is analogous to manifestation. Right? Manifestation only means something if it's manifesting something else. So therefore, there's no inherent, I don't know how to put it, existential, not reality, because it is a reality. They lose their sense of self is now one of, they have to look outside of themselves to find their purpose. Whereas the Jews, right, they personify the purpose itself. They're like a living expression of that idea of Torah Shabbat Peh. The Torah is filtered through the Jewish person, right? Someone who connects to the Torah. Of course, even a Jew can disconnect himself, but that was literally not just disconnecting himself from his purpose, it's destroying himself. That's why it's so serious. If a Jew disconnects himself from Torah, he dies, right? Spiritually dies. A non-Jew, he can function, but he can choose whether to fulfill his real purpose, which is to be a vessel of expression of God in the physical world, or he can choose something else. But he can't define the purpose from himself anymore, right? He can't be the source of meaning to the world. He can be one who brings out the meaning in the world, but he can't be the source of the meaning. That's only for the Jews now. That's the essential difference between Jews and non-Jews after the Torah, because the Jews are the ones who bear the Torah, right? God says you're the only ones who can keep it going, and we've kept it going through thousands of years. So, right, despite all the persecutions, that's the idea of Horeb. So that sets up as an element, even by good non-Jews, I guess, to an extent, of feeling inferior to Jews. But in truth, if they really appreciated the essential job they'd have, they'd be very happy with it. And that's why so many millions of Noachites very happy to remain non-Jewish, despite the fact that they know the importance of the Jewish mission in the world and the idea of the Torah. They're very happy just to remain non-Jewish because they find real meaning in that, right? It's a humility. It's very humble, right? Right? You might think the Jews can sometimes. The danger of the Jews is arrogance. Say that we're the ones with the primary bringers down of God's light to the world, right? It has to have a place to rest. So that's what the non-Jews are doing. So there is a danger of arrogance there. But in truth, they're both necessary. You can't have a soul without a body. You can't have a body without a soul. You can't have God's spirituality, which is meant to be manifested in the physical world, without the physical world being a place where the spirituality can be manifest. So they're both essential. But the problem is, the non-Jews have to understand, you have to go to the Jews, and the Torah, ultimately, it's not the Jews per se, but it's the Torah which the Jews have to find their purpose, right? That's why you don't have to become non-Jews don't have to become Jewish to find their purpose, but they still need Judaism, right? You need to have that knowledge that there is a creator to the universe, which is the message of Judaism, and he has a desire to imbue the physical world with goodness, and that can only happen if you've got a moral society, an ethical, functioning physical world. Okay. You see, the hatred of the Jews makes no sense, right? You see a survival that defies history, or any laws of history, of nature, and you see the predictions that came true. So the Jew is not a victim of history. He's proof that history has an author. That's what the Jew is. We are a living proof. As it says in Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 10 and 11, you are my witnesses. Atem edainu Hashem, Hashem says. Avdi asher bacharti, my servant which I have chosen. Right? You're my servant, you're my witnesses. The Jewish people themselves are a testimony to God's existence. Beautiful. Right? Okay? So when you see the suffering of the Jews, you see that's not sociology, that's not history, that's not nature, that's revelation. Yeah, that's Sinai. Yeah? That's Sinai coming true. It's not a one-off. This is why it's such a convincing argument for the proof of God. Because it didn't just happen once. This is a miracle which just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. In fact, let's finish off with the words of Napoleon himself. Right? There's a person called Count Stanislav Marie Henri de Boufflers. Apparently, I hope I said that right. He was a French nobleman and writer. According to multiple accounts, Napoleon Bonaparte asked him, "What's the most convincing proof of the existence of God?" And he replied, "The Jews, Your Majesty." The Jews, even the non-Jews, recognize the biggest proof for God's existence are the Jews themselves. Right? It's the miraculous existence of the Jews, the persecution and the survival and the predictions. A very, very convincing proof of God's existence and the divinity of the Torah, and, by the way, the divinity of the oral Torah as well, which also predicted this in a different way as well. Okay, thanks for listening. Hard lecture there, some quite emotional there. Yeah, as I said, that's something which drives the non-Jews to come back to the God of Israel after all these millennium, right? The suffering of the Jews, it tells them, it wakes up something inside. Wakes up something inside that we all recognize deep down who our Creator is, and we're here for the most wonderful purpose. And we should all be working together, being so happy in this job. But what messes everything up is that evil inclination, free will. We've got to beat that evil inclination we have, right? And if we don't, then we fall into the anti-Semitism. If it gets that bad, we have to rebel against the Jews and against God. But if we embrace God's task for mankind, whether it's the 613 commandments of the Jews or the 7 commandments of the non-Jews, then the non-Jews worked with the Jews and worked with God to bring God's light into the world, so we can all merit to go to the world to come and bask in that infinite pleasure we spoke about in our very first lecture and become like God. Okay, thanks for listening.